Hello everyone. My name is Walter, and at 60, I tend the quiet routines of a retired high school history teacher in our modest ranch-style home on the outskirts of Eugene, Oregon, where the Willamette Valley's misty mornings wrap the neighborhood in a soft, evergreen hush. Married for 35 years to Eloise, whose steady presence once anchored our days, like the Douglas firs lining our backyard fence. Though lately that steadiness has felt more like an echo than an embrace. And father to our two grown sons, Daniel and Michael, who call from their lives in Portland and Boise, their voices a distant tether to the family we'd raised amid PTA meetings and weekend hikes along the Mackenzie River trails. That overcast Thursday morning in mid-November, as the first week light of day filtered through the linen shades of our breakfast nook, casting pallid stripes across the formica table scarred from decades of family meals. The faint scent of last night's pot roast still clinging to the air like a half-remembered obligation. The even keel I'd maintained through years of emotional detachment tilted abruptly when Eloise's phone chimed from the sideboard, its screen blooming with a text that she glanced at before sliding it face down with a precision that belied her usual absent-mindedness. Her fingers lingering a fraction too long on the case, polish would cool under her touch, and in that uncharacteristic pause, a quiet rift opened in the calm I cultivated, not a storm, but a subtle undercurrent, pulling at the edges of our shared silence with the weight of something long withheld. I'd long accepted the emotional loneliness that had settled between us like dust on the mantelpiece bookshelves lined with our son's childhood photos. Her distant gaze during evening news hours, the way she'd fold the paper with deliberate creases after reading the obituaries, her responses to my queries about her day reduced to murmured affirmatives that dissolved into the hum of the refrigerator. But this moment, this shielded notification amid the drip of the coffee maker exhaling its dark, roasted breath into the room's warming air, carried a sharper intimation. A whisper that her withdrawal might conceal more than the quiet resentments we'd both let accrue over years of parallel lives under one roof. This is the psychological point where intuition pierces routine. Walter has survived years of emotional minimalism by naming it normal aging, a defense mechanism that protects attachment at the price of truth. The phone turned face down is small, almost banal, yet it destabilizes the narrative he has relied on. The first warning sign was already here. His anxiety does not explode. It seeps, which is typical for long marriages where partners fear that clarity will demand action. Notice how he immediately searches for benign explanations: fatigue, habit, personality. Denial here functions as a painkiller, dulling but not curing. Interpersonally, silence begins to collaborate with secrecy. Many people choose to remain silent at this point, and in vain. The house breathed with the unhurried cadence of our mornings. The soft tick of the wall clock above the sink, its pendulum swinging in lazy arcs that marked time, like the slow sway of wind chimes on the back porch during summer evenings we'd once shared with glasses of iced tea sweating condensation onto wicker coasters. The faint creak of floor joists as I shifted in my oak chair, its arms worn smooth from countless readings of the local gazette under the pendant light's diffused glow bulb, faintly yellowed from age, casting elongated shadows across the linoleum patterned in faded geometrics from a 1970s remodel we debated endlessly before settling on practicality over flair. Eloise moved through the space with her customary economy, pouring bran flakes into a ceramic bowl chipped at the rim from a long-ago dishwasher mishap. The crunch of cereal against porcelain a familiar underscore to her routine, her graying bob catching the light in silvery threads as she added milk from the fridge, the door's seal hissing open to release a cool puff scented with the tang of yogurt containers stacked neatly on the shelf. But today her shoulders held a subtle rigidity, the set of her jaw when she replaced the carton of microtension I'd begun to catalog in recent months, attributing it to the arthritis that slowed her garden tending or the empty nest ache we both skirted in conversations that veered safely to weather reports and grocery lists. "I'm lunching with Margaret today," she said after a swallow, her voice threading the words with the even tone she'd perfected over decades, spoon pausing midway to her mouth, droplets of milk tracing the utensil's curve before falling back to the bowl with a soft plop that amplified in the nook's confines, Margaret being her book club friend from the library circle, the one with a clipped enunciation and stories of European cruises that Eloise recounted with polite detachment over our suppers of reheated casseroles. Yet the announcement snagged faintly, laced with the residue of that phone's muted glow. The way her eyes had flicked toward the window where rain beaded on the panes in irregular jewels, mirroring the erratic patter of my detached calm beginning to fracture, and as I nodded, buttering toast with the knife's serrated edge scraping against the bread's crusty heel, releasing a warm, yeasty aroma that briefly masked the undernote of unease, I pondered if this was merely the deepening of our emotional chasm, the loneliness I'd rationalized as the natural settling of long marriages, or if her distance harbored shadows I'd been too resigned to illuminate. I carried my plate to the sink, the faucet sputter filling the basin with lukewarm water that steamed faintly against the chill seeping from the single-pane glass overlooking the side yard, where fallen leaves from the maple clustered in sodden piles against the fence posts, their coppery decay a seasonal reminder of impermanence I'd lectured on in classrooms filled with the chalk dust and adolescent sighs, and watched as Eloise rinsed her bowl, her movements precise but unhurried suds. Clinging to the sponge like fleeting thoughts she didn't voice, the dish towel draped over the oven handle absorbing droplets, with a subtle darkening of its faded stripes. "Sounds pleasant. Tell her I enjoyed that history tome she lent last month," I replied, the words emerging with the practiced warmth of habit, though the pause that followed stretched a beat longer than usual, her back to me as she dried her hands on the towel, fingers twisting the fabric in a slow ring that released a faint squeak of cotton threads, before she turned, offering a smile that touched her lips but not her eyes, hazel irises contracting slightly in the morning's pallor, a gesture I'd once read as fatigue from her volunteer shifts at the Historical Society, but now questioned as evasion, the air between us thickening with the unspoken bulk of our detachment. As she gathered her purse from the hall hook, its leather strap frayed at the edges from years of shoulder slinging to committee meetings, the zipper's teeth catching briefly on a loose thread, she brushed my cheek with a kiss cooler than the draft from the mudroom door, leaving behind the faint, powdery trace of her talc that used to linger like a benediction, but now dissipated swiftly into the kitchen's humid wake. And I stood there amid the breakfast's remnants, the toast crumbs scattering like confetti from a joyless party on the tablecloth, the newspaper folded to the crossword half solved in my looping script, feeling the first tendril of disquiet uncoil, not alarm, but a gentle erosion, like the river carving canyons over eons, wondering if the warmth we'd shared in youth had cooled to this polite frost, or if beneath her emotional distance lay a secret as enduring as the rings in the oak dining table, etched by time and hidden from view. By midday, as the rain had steadied into a persistent drizzle that tapped against the roof like fingers drumming an impatient rhythm, blurring the view from the den's bay window where bookshelves sagged under volumes of local lore and faded yearbooks from my teaching days, my focus on the archival project I'd taken up in retirement, digitizing old lesson plans on the laptop's keyboard, its keys sticky from coffee rings etched into the trackpad, fractured into intervals of reverie, Eloise's luncheon announcement replaying with the undercurrent of her recent withdrawal, the way she'd taken to lingering in the garden shed after supper, emerging with soil-caked gloves and a vague mention of organizing tools, her silhouette framed in the dusk light filtering through the slided door, trowel in hand glinting dully against the potting bench's scarred surface. I'd attributed it to the loneliness that mirrored my own, the quiet drift after the boys left home where conversations dwindled to logistics, grocery runs to the co-op where the aisles smelled of damp earth from the produce bins, her cart veering toward the organic section with a decisiveness that left me trailing, basket swinging empty at my side, but now, in the den's stuffy warmth, the space heater's coils glowing orange behind the grate with a low hum that vibrated through the wool rugs. Fringe, that justification thinned, worn by the memory of her phone's face-down vigil on the nightstand last week, its vibration a muffled buzz during our bedtime reading, her hand darting out from under the quilt to silence it, the quilt chenille loops catching on her nightgown's lace cuff in a snag she ignored. I closed the laptop with a soft click, the screen's blue light fading to black like a curtain dropping on an unfinished scene, and rose to stretch, vertebrae popping in a cascade that echoed the rain's patter on the gutters outside, the motion pulling at the flannel shirt's hem tucked into khakis creased from the chair's imprint, and wandered to the kitchen for tea, the kettle's whistle building to a keen that cut through the house's hush as steam jetted from the spout, bogging the window above. The sink where condensation traced erratic paths down the glass, mirroring the erratic weave of doubt threading my thoughts. Steeping the chamomile bag in a mug whose handle bore the faint chip from Michael's toddler grip, the herbal infusion releasing a mild, apple-like sweetness that grounded the senses amid the fridge's cyclic hum, I reviewed our calendar on the wall, its laminated surface curling at the edges from humidity, Eloise's precise script marking, "Margaret, lunch," in blue ink that bled slightly into the paper's grain, yet beside it, a faint erasure mark from last month's book club rescheduled, her explanation of a forgotten errand, delivered with eyes fixed on the stove's pilot light flickering blue, the gas's faint sulphurous whiff mingling with the tea's steam. Hope stirred faintly then, a residual calm in my detachment, suggesting her distance was the ebb of our long tide, that these veiled moments were the flotsam of aging gracefully together, but worry tightened its coil as I sipped, the liquid scalding the tongue in a brief flare before cooling to tolerable warmth, and frustration kindled low when I recalled her delayed return from a garden society meeting 2 evenings prior, the front door opening at 9, with the click of the latch echoing down the hall, her coat shedding droplets onto the entry tile like reluctant confessions, the fabric heavy with the scent not of rain, but something sharper, like wool warmed by another's proximity. A call from Daniel interrupted, his voice crackling through the landline's receiver coiled on the counter, the plastic worm from disuse against my ear as he updated on his promotion, laughter punctuating the line like punctuation in a well-turned phrase. But even as I congratulated him, the receiver's cord twisting under my free hand, my mind circled back to Eloise's evasive glance that morning. The way her laughter during our rare shared anecdotes had grown forced, trailing off into silences, filled by the tick of the mantel clock or the distant call of a Steller's jay from the firs. As afternoon waned, the light shifting to a slate-gray pallor that seeped through the curtains like diluted ink, I busied with the archive, scanning yellowed transparencies of Civil War maps under the desk lamp's adjustable arm, its beam-pooling focused illumination on the glass plate, but the task dissolved into pauses where I noted her purse left unzipped on the hall table, a lipstick tube rolling free to clatter softly against the wood, its cap embossed with a monogram not ours, a red herring or clue I'd pocketed with feigned nonchalance, the metal cool and unfamiliar against my palm. When she returned at 3, the door's hinges creaking in protest after her keys scraped, she carried a paper sack from the deli downtown, the wax crinkling under her arm as she unpacked sandwiches with deliberate folds, mustard's tangy bite wafting up to mingle with the tea's lingering herbal note, her narrative of the lunch veering from book discussions to a detour for errands, the words delivered with a smile that didn't crinkle her eyes, hand gesturing vaguely toward the window where rain smeared the view, and as we ate at the nook table, bread's crust yielding under teeth with a subtle crackle, suspicion deepened, heartbeat a steady undercurrent to the masticating quiet, the fraying hope that her emotional distance was mutual solitude now straining against the evidence of secrets nurtured in the margins of our detached days, leaving me to question if the life we'd built in quiet parallel was a shared fiction. It seems parting under the weight of unspoken truths. Suspicion has now matured from fleeting doubt into cognitive restructuring. Walter is not simply wondering what Eloise feels, he is reinterpreting decades. This is a brutal shift because memory, once trusted, becomes unreliable. A typical mistake is to think that this is just a phase, a mood, retirement blues, empty nest syndrome. But his body already knows more than his rational mind. Notice the sensory vigilance, the cataloging of gestures, smells, pauses. Hyperattention is a trauma precursor. The nervous system prepares for impact. The marriage is quietly moving from companionship to investigation. Trust is no longer assumed, it is audited. The following days unfolded in a veil of deliberate normalcy, the house's rhythms persisting like a metronome set to adagio, the morning's ritual of oatmeal simmering on the stove, its oats swelling in milky curls that released a comforting, nutty vapor into the kitchen's sun-dappled air, Eloise portioning raisins with a measuring spoon's metallic clink against the porcelain dish, her movements fluid but contained, as if each gesture were portioned to avoid excess contact with the space we shared. Yet beneath that surface, my calm detachment gave way to a vigilant undercurrent, suspicion's quiet tide lapping at the edges of trust I'd long let erode without protest, moral hesitation surfacing like bubbles in the simmering pot, questioning the ethics of probing a marriage's quiet decay. I'd begun with observation, noting the phone's new position on the charger in the bedroom, cord draped like a noose over the nightstand's edge cluttered with her reading glasses, and my dog-eared biography of Grant, the device's screensaver activating after idle moments to display a generic landscape that belied the notifications it swallowed, and during her afternoon naps on the living room recliner, its naugahyde sighing under her weight, afghan knitted by her mother draping in woolen folds. Scented with cedar from the linen closet, I glance at the call log, thumb scrolling with the hesitation of a man testing thin ice, the glass's faint warmth from recent use seeping into my skin like guilt's slow burn. Small victories emerged in fragments. A deleted text thread glimpsed in the recently closed app's sender's name. R. Garden Supply. With timestamps aligning to her shed vigils, the message's innocuous queries about fertilizer ratios that dissolved into ellipses suggesting more, my pulse quickening to a muted thud against my temples as I closed the app, the home screen's icons realigning with a digital snap, only for setback to follow when she stirred prematurely, murmuring about a headache from the damp, her eyes fluttering open to meet mine across the room, where the floor lamp shade cast a honey glow on the wallpaper's subtle floral emboss. Her query, "Everything all right?" delivered with a tilt of her head that sent silver strands slipping from her loose bun, a gesture I'd once found endearing in its vulnerability, but now read as deflection, the air between us cooling as she rose, robe belt cinching tighter around her waist with a whisper of satin. Red herrings abounded. A florist's receipt tucked in her wallet during a joint errand to the bank, the slip's ink faded but legible for annuals for the bed, lulling me toward dismissal of her withdrawal as mere preoccupation with the yard's winter prep, the teller's partition glass fogging briefly from our exhaled breaths in the lobby's recirculated air heavy with the scent of fresh lozenges from the bowl on the counter, until evening brought another layer, her phone chiming during supper, the vibration rattling the silverware drawer beside the table, her hand pausing mid-reach for the salt cellar, crystals scattering like frost on the linen runner before she silenced it, murmuring, "Wrong number." The pause heavy with the forked tines hovering over her plate, steam from the shepherd's pie curling upward in savory tendrils laced with time's earthiness. Determination coalesced amid the pain's incremental etch, anger a low simmer displaced by disappointment's dull weight in my chest, the archive work abandoned for walks along the neighborhood paths where puddles reflected the overcast sky in shattered mirrors, boot soles squelching in the muddy gravel that clung in clods to the treads, each step a meditation on the moral tightrope of invasion versus ignorance. The distant hum of leaf blowers from neighboring lots underscoring the isolation of my vigil. That Saturday, as fog blanketed the valley in a thick, woolen shroud that muffled the church bells tolling noon from the steeple 2 miles distant. I yielded to the pull during her errand to the Historical Society, the house empty save for the tick of clocks sinking in discordant harmony, and delved deeper, lifting her laptop from the desk in the spare room, its surface dusted with a fine layer of pollen from the open window. Keys worn smooth under fingertips calloused from years of chalkboard. Erasers. Password entered with the birthday we'd shared in vows. The screen awakening to a desktop wallpaper of our son's graduation photo. Smiles frozen in pixelated youth. Folders yielded banalities at first. Recipes clipped from magazines, volunteer schedules and grid layouts. But buried in email archives, a chain from 5 years prior surfaced. Weekend plans. The subject line innocuous until opened, exchanges laced with endearments that twisted like barbed wire in my gut, references to our spot by the river. Veiled in code that shattered the illusion of her distance as mutual, the cursors blink a mocking heartbeat in the room's chill. Notification. Silenced, but the discoveries echo resounding in the tense quiet, breath shallow against the monitor's cool exhalation, propelling me from shock's numb paralysis toward the confrontation looming like the fog's unseen edge, determination forged in the forge of long-term secrets finally laid bare. Here denial collapses under documentary reality. The betrayal is not impulsive but architectural, built across years, which magnifies injury because it rewrites the timeline of the marriage. Walter's shock is mixed with humiliation. He has been living beside a parallel intimacy. The moral conflict about reading her messages evaporates. Self-protection overrides etiquette. Psychologically, certainty hurts more than suspicion because it kills hope. The nervous system shifts from anxious searching to grieving. Importantly, anger is still muted. Long-term attachment often converts rage into numbness. This discovery is the irreversible threshold. Evening draped the house in a somber twilight. By the time Eloise returned from her society meeting, the front doors latch engaging with a resonant click that reverberated through the hallway's narrow confines, carrying the faint rustle of her coat shedding rain from its shoulders as she hung it on the hall tree, wooden pegs groaning under the damp wool's weight, droplets tracing the trunk's carved grooves to pool on the slate tiles below. Cool and slick underfoot like the chill settling in my bones as I waited in the living room, the wingback chair's horsehair upholstery prickling against my back through the cardigan's thin wool, fire crackling low in the grate with pops of sap releasing resinous smoke that curled toward the flue, casting flickering shadows across the mantel where our wedding photos stood in silver frame, her smile then vibrant against the sepia of time. I'd spent the hours in a suspended vigil, the laptop's incriminating screen now dark on the ottoman, but its revelation seared into memory. Emails spanning a decade, our spot, decoded as clandestine afternoons by the river's bend where wild salmonberries bloomed in summer, her emotional distance, not a shared solitude but a deliberate veil over a parallel life with Raymond. The garden supply contact a facade for rendezvous that mocked our vows' quiet fidelity, anger a distant rumble yielding to shock's hollow core, the hearth's warmth mocking the internal frost as rain lashed the panes and escalating sheets, thunder grumbling like the storm I'd harbored unspoken for years. "Eloise!" I called, voice emerging steady from the dimness, the word hanging in the air threaded with the fire's woody tang, and the wet earth scent clinging to her boots as she paused in the archway, silhouette framed by the hall light's jaundiced bulb, her hand lingering on the jam's beaded paneling, fingers tracing the wood's grain in an unconscious rhythm before she stepped forward, slippers whispering over the runner rug's fringe, eyes adjusting to the gloom where the lamp's fringed shade. Diffused amber pools on the end tables cluttered with coasters ringed by ghosted beverages. "We need to discuss something," I continued, rising slowly, the chair's legs scraping the oak floor with a low groan that underscored the pause stretching taut between us, her posture shifting, a subtle intake of breath lifting her shoulders beneath the sweater's cable knit, chin angling slightly as if to deflect, Before she lowered her purse to the settee with deliberate care, the leather sighing against the cushions, rain beaded on its flap like unshed accusations. "The emails, with Raymond," I said, the name landing like a stone in still water, ripples distorting her features in the firelight's dance, eyebrows arching faintly, lips parting on a silent exhalation that stirred the air, carrying the faint mint of her afternoon tea, her hand rising to the collar of her blouse, fingers plucking at the pearl button there, a micro-movement of pearl rolling under nail as she sank onto the settee's arm, the frame creaking under her weight. "It was nothing. A friendship, born of shared interests in the garden club," she murmured, words fracturing on pauses laden with the rain's relentless drum against the roof, gaze skittering to the fire where embers shifted in a cascade of sparks, her body language a fortress breached, arms folding loosely across her midriff, knuckles paling against the wool as if to hold in the unraveling. But the gaslighting wavered when I recited a line from memory. "Missed our walks today. Let's make it up. Tomorrow by the bend." The quote delivered in the hearth's glow that etched hollows under her eyes, her face crumpling in a slow ripple, forehead creasing like parchment under pressure, a quiet sigh escaping as tears welled, tracing deliberate paths down cheeks rouged faintly by the chill, glistening in the lamplight like dew on autumn leaves. "How long have you known?" she whispered, the admission raw, voice breaking on a hitch she swallowed back, hand extending palm up in supplication, fingers curling at the tips as if grasping at vanishing air, the twist unforeseen in its duration. A decade's shadow affair, not fleeting lapse, but sustained secret, her distance a scaffold for duplicity that shattered my resigned calm into grief's jagged maw. Rage flickered briefly, a heat flushing my neck like the fire's backdraft, swinging to despair's numb tide as she rose, knees unsteady against the rug's nap, murmuring of loneliness in our predictable routine, words laced with manipulation's subtle hook, probing for the forgiveness I'd extended in smaller fractures over years, her proximity a conflicted advance, hand hovering near mine, breath shallow in the room's charged hush broken only by the clock's inexorable tick. The confrontation exposes two survival strategies. Eloise minimizes and reframes, attempting to reduce catastrophe to misunderstanding, classic damage control meant to preserve identity. Walter, meanwhile, is already moving towards separation of cells. Her question is revealing. She is less focused on pain caused than on exposure. That asymmetry is devastating. Many people choose to remain silent at this point, and in vain, accepting partial apologies to restore familiarity. Walter's restraint is not passivity. It is the early formation of boundaries. Love begins to detach from obligation. Yet composure held, the realization dawning that agency resided not in reclaiming her veiled world but in releasing its hold, the rain's fury outside sinking with the internal gale as I step back, the balcony's French doors creaking open to admit a gust laden with petrichor and pine, chilling the hearth's warmth, and scattering ash across the hearthstone in gray flecks like shed illusions, her pleas. "Walter, please, it was never about not loving you," trailing into the night like smoke. Dispersed, the confrontations swing from shock to resolve a cathartic forge, emotional state a tempered alloy of sorrow and sovereignty. The long-term secrets reveal not destruction but delineation, boundaries etched in the storm's wake. As I lingered in the threshold's draft, the house's silence now a conspirator turned ally, urging toward the freedom of truths confronted at last. In the fortnight following the revelation, the house morphed into a repository of echoed absences, each room a diorama of suspended accord. The kitchen where we'd shared dawn coffees now echoing with the solitary clink of my mug against saucer, porcelain chipped from decades of absent-minded stacks, the bruised bitter steam curling unchecked into the morning's pallid light slanting through unshuttered blinds, casting bars across the table's varnish worn to a satin sheen by elbows propped in. Contemplation. The bedroom upstairs, with its maple headboard scarred from moves between rentals in our early years, becoming a terrain of tactical retreat, Eloise claiming the right side, with her quilt folded precisely at the foot, while I unfolded the guest cot in the study, its canvas frame sighing under my weight amid stacks of unbound journals yellowing in the dry heat from the baseboard radiator's hiss. Sheets carrying the faint must of storage cedar. Her reactions oscillated in the distance's wake, subdued overtures at breakfast, voice softening on offers of reconciliation as she buttered toast with the knife's deliberate scrape, crumbs scattering like tentative bridges across the placemat, only to harden into defenses of needing space. When I held firm, her chair pushing back with a leg's muffled thud against the linoleum, eyes narrowing in that remote gaze I'd long endured as emotional armor. Financially, the groundwork laid in quiet consultations with an advisor over the phone's coiled cord, his voice tinny through the receiver pressed to my ear in the den's alcove, spreadsheets of joint accounts and pension allotments blurring on the notepad's lined pages under the desk lamp's unwavering beam, ink bleeding slightly from the pen's pressure. Legally, the attorney's office downtown loomed in scheduled appointments. Manila folders of preliminary drafts arriving by post, their seals unbroken on the hall table amid the mail's scatter of seed catalogs and utility bills, each envelope's crisp edge a reminder of the life we commingled now parsed into equitable shares. Inner conflicts churned beneath the surface calm. The detached veteran in me, versed in history's inexorable tides, clashed with the raw sting of her betrayal's longevity, vignettes resurfacing unbidden, the riverbank picnics we'd packed for family outings, cooler handles biting into palms slick with sunscreen, her laughter then genuine amid the boys' splashes, now retroactively shadowed by Raymond's walks, a phantom overlay that hollowed the memory's warm, moral wrestlings over severing a bond forged in youth's forge, her distance perhaps a mirror to my own retreats into lesson plans and solitary reads by the fireside, the armchair's depression a testament to evenings lost to pages turning under lamplight's pool, yet the betrayal's persistence, a steady ache in the chest like arthritis flaring in damp weather, fortified against mending's allure, acknowledging that her secret's architecture had excavated chasms too vast for words alone to bridge. Setbacks threaded the resolve. A late-night letter slipped under the study door, her script looping in pleas for one more chance, read by flashlight's beam that trembled in my grip, the paper's vellum whispering against the floorboards as tears blurred the ink, fracturing poise until morning's gray light filtered through frost-laced panes, a small triumph in the walk to the mailbox where dew beaded on the box's flag like fresh resolve, steps crunching frost-kissed gravel underfoot. One dusk, as the valley sank into indigo veils pierced by the first star's tentative pricks, Eloise approached in the backyard, her silhouette emerging from the garden's gloom where the shed loomed like a confessor's booth, footsteps hesitant on the flagstone path slick with recent mist, shawl draped over shoulders against the bite that nipped at exposed skin. "I've ended it with him, for us," she said, voice a fragile murmur carried on the breeze rustling the furze needles in a susurrus, hand half extended in the gloaming, fingers splayed like olive branches wilted at the tips, but I remained by the porch rail, wood grain rough under palm, the varnish flaking in specks like shed deceptions as I replied, "It's not the ending that mends what's lost, Eloise. It's the years it stole while we drifted." This sentence marks the rebirth of agency. Walter identifies the true crime: time, intimacy, and informed choice taken from him. Forgiveness becomes impossible because the past cannot be renegotiated. Notice the absence of revenge. He seeks clarity, not punishment. That is psychological differentiation. He no longer measures himself by her need or remorse. Consequences now shift from emotional to structural, legal, financial, domestic. Pain remains, yet dignity stabilizes him. Growth often sounds quiet like this. The declaration lingered, sparse but resonant, her form deflating in the half-light. A sigh blending with the wind's low moan before she withdrew to the house's glow, door latching with a soft finality that symbolized the line drawn, heartbeat easing from its vigilant cadence, a subtle unburdening in the limbs like the first thaw after freeze, clarity blooming amid the night's crisp inhale, the choice solidifying, not acrimonious rupture, but a measured parting for preservation. The eastern horizon's faint blush presaging dawn's unshared yet wholly mine. Half a year later, with the divorce formalized in the county clerk's austere hall, its linoleum floors echoing footsteps like judgments rendered, signatures inked on decrees under the fluorescent strip's merciless glare that hummed with finality's indifferent drone. The reflective severance I pursued wove into a tapestry of solitary renewal, Eloise decamping to a cottage by the river's edge in nearby Springfield, her belongings winnowed into boxes carted by the sons in a rented van whose exhaust lingered acrid in the driveway's gravel, our interactions distilled to seasonal cards and joint holiday calls routed through Daniel's line, her voice a polite echo across the ether, laced with the river's distant rush audible in the background, our words a careful choreography over the chasm we'd mutually mapped. The house, once a diptych of parallel silences, reclaimed as a monologue of quiet invention, rooms aired with windows flung wide to the valley's breath, admitting the scent of blooming azaleas from the front bed she'd once tended, walls repapered in muted sages that absorbed light without demanding it, mornings commencing with the percolator's gurgle on the counter, coffee's robust earthiness blooming in the pot's glass globe, as sunlight slanted unhindered through shears I'd washed to crispness. The first draft a ritual of presence, mug ceramic warmth seeping into palms calloused from garden forks now wielded solo, steam veiling the window's view of dew-kissed lawns rolling toward the fence line. New rhythms inscribed the days with understated grace. Dawn constitutional along the river trail, where mist clung to alders like gossamer veils lifting gradually to reveal the water's glassy flow murmuring over polished stones, boots sinking into loamy earth scented with fern and damp moss, each stride a dialogue with solitude's companionable hush, breath sinking with the current's lap. Afternoons drew me to the local archives. Sleeves rolled against the reading room's dry heat from radiator. Clanks, fingers tracing microfiche reels under the magnifier's lens, unspooling tales of valley settlers that mirrored my own narrative's revision, the project a bridge from teaching's echo to personal historiography. Recovery transforms narrative ownership. Walter stops being a character in Eloise's secret and becomes the author of his future. New rituals, walking, research, craft, restore predictability to a nervous system long held in ambiguity. Importantly, he does not erase her. He contextualizes her. That is maturity, not repression. Betrayal becomes data rather than destiny. Trust, once external, is internalized as self-trust. Companions reemerge from life's periphery. Old colleagues for chess matches at the community center, board squares worn glossy from countless openings, pieces clacking in thoughtful pauses amid the scent of polished oak and instant coffee brewing in the corner urn, laughter resurfacing unbidden over pawn sacrifices that evoke classroom debates, pursuits shelved in marital drift revived, a woodworking class in the extension program shed, planes rasp gliding over pine boards under the aroma of sawdust and linseed oil, each dovetail joint a metaphor for seams reforged without duress, shavings curling like shed burdens at my feet. Manipulations evaporated, her missives arrived factual, queries on the house's plumbing devoid of undercurrents, her therapy's progress intimated not as bait but beacons in disparate orbits, our accord a testament to boundaries' quiet efficacy. Contemplations flowered in transitional hushes, often during porch vigils at eventide, Adirondack chairs slats cupping spine as the sun dipped behind the Cascades in a blaze of alpenglow, air cooling to carry the evening primrose's subtle sweetness from the beds I'd mulched anew, insights crystallizing into seasoned acuity. Betrayal, I discerned, flourishes in the arbors of emotional loneliness. Mine a retreat into history's annals, hers a foraging beyond our hedged enclosure for Raymond's affirmations unmet in our detachment's drought. Our marital malaise a duet of unvoiced solitudes where distance ossified into deceit, the long-term secret a symptom of drifts uncharted until revelation sextant. Yet in dissolution's alembic, evolution distilled ache into acumen, not obliteration of the sting, a vestigial twinge akin to joints protesting weather shift, but its refinement into relational discernment, grasping that intimacy endures not in endurance alone, but elective proximity, bolstering the spirit's ramparts against isolation's siege. Psychologically, the passage echoed betrayal's measured meander, detachment's placid drift capsizing into disclosure's deluge, indignation's ember cooling to melancholy's mire, surfacing in equanimity's expanse where cicatrices charred not frailty but fortified terrain, resilient in repose. For the legacy we'd etched in sons' lives, the exemplar of rupture as reclamation persists as subdued triumph, dialogues envisioned over hearthside teas, mugs steaming with bergamot citrus whisper, sentiments sifted like archival dust, candor the lens of legacy. As winter yielded to spring's tentative overtures, crocuses piercing the mulch and lavender spikes like missives from below, I ambled the block at gloaming, the lane's asphalt still warm underfoot from the day's one sun, crickets' tentative chirrs heralding from hedgerows dew-limbed, inhalation deep and unhurried, pulse even, gait unencumbered, the residual acerbity a nuance to equanimity's poise, ceding to solitude's serene vigor. Closure enfolded with gentleness, purgation in illusion's quiet consignation, a muted optimism glimmering like the first firefly's pulse amid twilight's hush, beacons liberated into encroaching velvet, limning not lacunae but the illimitable prospect, a chronicle recast, empowered in voracious tenor, intimating that from detachments detritus ascends the indomitable chronicler, attuned to Aurora's self-summoned. Walter's journey illustrates the slow psychology of late-life betrayal, intuition, denial, confirmation, confrontation, boundary, reconstruction. Trust erodes quietly long before it breaks audibly. The affair devastates him not because love vanishes, but because reality splits into what was lived and what was true. Yet the rupture becomes instructive. By refusing spectacle or vengeance, he converts victimhood into authorship. The marriage ends, but identity consolidates. Pain remains as scar tissue, sensitive, informative, survivable. What emerges is not triumph, but coherence. He would rather inhabit a difficult truth than a comforting illusion.